Hello everyone, and welcome to my talk. It's a pleasure to me to be here and share a little bit about my own trajectory as a Ruby developer. My name is Rafael França, and you can find me at GitHub and Twitter as @Rafael França. I'm a member of the Rails core team since 2012. For those who don't know, this is a team responsible for developing and defining the direction of the framework. Since 2014, I keep the first position in the list of all-time contributors for the Rails framework. I work at Shopify, a commerce platform with the mission to make commerce better to everyone. At Shopify, I'm a principal developer in the Ruby Rails infrastructure team, a team which I helped to found, and is responsible for the direction of Ruby and Rails inside the company. You might know this team for a few recent projects that we announced, like YJIT, the proposal to bring object shapes to Ruby, and many other contributions to the Rails framework and across the entire ecosystem. I'm here to share a little bit about my story, what motivated me to get to where I am today, and all the challenges that I had to overcome. I believe that by sharing my story, I can inspire some of you to get more involved with the Ruby community and perhaps become a regular contributor to the projects that you love and use every day. My story starts in 2003. At the time, I had to choose what I would do for my career before joining the university. I was 17 years old. I had no clear idea what I want for my entire career. My choice ended up being computer science, which I barely knew what was about. But I had a very good experience with computers during my childhood, so that is why I tried computer science. My first real experience with programming languages was with a language called Pascal, and I really enjoyed it. I spent a lot of time practicing during the classes, doing the exercises, and programming just for fun. After that first programming course, I found a new passion that was programming. After that semester, we would learn a lot of other different languages like C++ and Java. I was very excited about this newfound passion and decided to learn more about it. I was so keen to learn that I started to go to the library to find and read programming books. In the library shelf, I saw a relatively small book with a white cover with a word that I never saw before, refactoring. That book, wrote by Martin Foley, got my immediate attention for being small and for having that very strange word. When I opened the book, I saw the book was English. At the time, I did not know much about English, but I decided to try and read that book anyway. It was the first book I read fully in English, so I struggled a lot. I had to look in dictionaries to be able to translate from English to Portuguese and understand what was written there. But in the end, I really enjoyed it. From the book, I learned about another author, Kent Beck, and two new concepts that was new to me, TDD and string programming. I think that was a very magic moment to me, and probably the beginning of my curiosity about programming best practices. I was very keen to learn about more about good ways to write software. But unfortunately, my graduation was not going to teach me any of that, or even any about those concepts that I just learned in the books. Fast forward to 2007, I was struggling to graduate. And I perceived that all the things that attracted me in the programming was not the same things that I was going to learn during my graduation. So I completely lost interest on the graduation. I decided to put my graduation aside and try to find a job. In my city, one of the smallest capitals cities in the country, Brazil, I would only find jobs with PHP or Java, since those are the biggest communities in that region of the country. I ended up getting one with PHP that was a language that I did not know much about. And because for me it looked more simpler than Java that I was already using in the university. And I used that opportunity to try to apply the concepts that I learned about reading the books from Martin Fowler and Kent Beck in this new job. Before dropping the university once for all, some professors started to show interest in the kind of things I was interested in. So, with the help of this professor, I started to work in a research project inside the university with the Java language. This project was trying to apply concepts like solid, service-oriented architecture refactoring in tests to show to the students what the concepts are, and also to create some kind of like research of software engineering inside the university. Our project was to create web applications in Java, and everything was so hard to do. Like creating an application in Java at that time required a lot of configuration in XML files. Like even if you were able to configure, nothing worked together. And you had trouble with a lot of different like components of that application not working and sometimes working and sometimes not working. There was a lot of choices and a lot of acronyms in the Java community. Just to name a few: Java 7 Faces, Java 7 Pages, Java Persistent API, Tomcat, JBoss, Hibernate. You had to choose every single part of your web application to be able to develop using Java. I did not believe that was the best way to write web applications, and I started to search for alternatives. In that search, I found about a project called JBoss. And looking at that project, it simplified a lot how to set up those web applications with Java. It had generators to create the application, what means that like you could use them to already get the application working without having to think a lot about which components you should get. And even had some generators to create some initial pages in the same way that Rails has scaffoldings. Reading the JBoss documentation, I found that it was heavily inspired in another framework called Ruby on Rails. That was the first time I heard about Ruby and about Rails. I actually did not know that there was a difference between Ruby and Rails. And then I started to look what this Ruby on Rails framework was about. When I read about it, I immediately fell in love. I could not believe how easy it was to create a web application using Rails. Of course, I got very excited and tried to apply in my university project, but in the end, the professors decided to keep trying to work with Java. So I had not much success in that. I also tried to apply it to my work and in my job, but the same thing happened that they actually want to keep using PHP. That was the language they were used with. But I did not give up and started to devote a lot of my free time to learn Ruby in Rails. I found a series of screencasts called Railscasts, and started to watch every single one of them since the first episode. At this point, I could read English very well, but watching videos without subtitles were very hard to me. When I was watching Railscasts, I not only learned about Rails, but I was also learning how to understand English. In 2008, I was still working with PHP, and most of my contact with Ruby was through blogs and Railscasts. Rails was in the version 2.3, and there were already a very vivid community on Twitter and GitHub, which I was already following. During that time, a new web framework in Ruby started to get some traction. This framework was called MERB. Members of both the Rails core team and the MERB core team wrote a series of blog posts explaining why one was better than the other. It was a very, I would say, aggressive era between those two teams that was basically bad-mouthing the other framework. But in the end of 2008, both teams announced that they would join forces and work together to merge MERB into Rails, in the effort that was called Rails 3. Many of the innovations of the Ruby community happened because of this merge. Just to name a few, projects like Bundle and Rack were created, and the current architecture of Rails is still the one that was defined during this time. And many blog posts and videos were being released explaining each one of those projects and those innovations. 2008 was also the year of the Rails does not scale meme. Because Twitter had some problems to handle the load at the time due to the fast growth of the problem, we had a lot of people blaming Rails and Ruby for those problems. I will not lie that during this time, I felt very insecure about continuing to invest in Ruby. After all, I did not want to spend a lot of time investing in something that a lot of people was criticizing. But there were not other languages that gave me so much happiness than Ruby at the moment, so I decided to ignore those allegations. In 2010, a Brazilian called José Valim joined the Rails core team. At the time, José was by far the most active contributor for Rails. He was the first line of response of the project, merging PRs, replying to issues, and answering questions of users. He was working full-time in the framework. When I saw that, I realized that it was possible for me, a Brazilian, working in a very small company in Brazil, to also be member of a big open source project like José was part of the Rails. And that became a personal goal. But that was far from my reality. I was mostly working with PHP, in a place where Ruby was barely known. In the day that José became a core member, I set as a personal goal work with José someday. José also wrote a book on how to extend the Rails framework to build new features. This book was the Crafting Rails application book, which I bought and started to read. This was the first advanced Rails book that I ever read, and still today I cannot think in a better book to explain how Rails works than this book. With this new knowledge, I decided to invest some time in learning how to contribute to Rails. I started to read every single commit in the repository. I'm going to confess that for more than 1 year, I could not understand what was going on in that repository, even after reading José's book. The commit messages were very clear, but the code just looked so strange to me that I could not understand what the change was about. But I did not give up and continued to read the commits, even though I could not understand them. Looking back, I think that was the best decision I could make. After a while, everything clicked together, and I felt very confident to change anything in the framework. Until these days, this is a practice that I still do. I even expanded it to also read all the commits in the Ruby repository. Late in 2010, I decided that there was a time to me to contribute to any open source project. Simpleform was the first open source project that I started to contribute. At the time, I was very afraid to write anything in English. I could read and listen due to reading many English books and also listening to the Rails casts, but I was not comfortable with writing or speaking. Because this project was maintained by Brazilians like myself, I was confident that I could try to communicate with them in English without the fear of making mistakes, and in any case, if they don't understand what I was trying to say in English, I could try to speak in Portuguese. I had no previous experience contributing to open source projects or even writing Ruby project libraries, so this was the first time I was contributing to a library written in Ruby. I barely knew how to test the library. My first PR I submitted without any tests or even descriptions. The maintainer decided to merge with without the tests and added the tests after the merge. When I saw how he created the tests, I learned from the code he wrote, and I started to try to mimic it as well. In my next contributions, I already started to write tests because now I had learned how to do it. Quickly, I felt confident to fix any issue and to reply to any question related to the project. Even without being a maintainer, I was participating of the mailing list and helping users with the project, submitting patches to fix the problems and reviewing PRs from other people. In 2011, I finally fulfilled my goal to work with José Valim. I joined Plataforma Tech. Plataforma Tech was a consulting company in Ruby on Rails and Agile, which was acquired by a Brazilian bank a few years ago. This company was famous in the Ruby community because it created few projects like Device and Simpleform that were used by members of the community, and at the same point in its history had 3 Rails core members. It also was the birthplace of a programming language called Elixir. At the Plataforma Tech, I was a consultant, and in my consultant life, I could work in many sectors like media, commerce, sport, financing, among others. It was my first opportunity to work full-time with Ruby, and among other things, I could be working with José Valim. My final goal was to contribute to Rails, and I thought that José could help me with that. Right after I joined the company, José started working in a new programming language called Elixir, and he was not participating much of the company's day by day. I had very few opportunities to work with José, and when I could, it was mostly in the Elixir language or in some client work. In 2012, as a New Year's resolution, I decided to start contributing to Rails by myself. I felt confident enough given my experience maintaining simple form and also for all the commits that I already had read at this point to be able to contribute. And of course, if I needed any help, I could ask with Jose. I started with the part of the framework I was most comfortable with, Action View, mostly because simple form was a heavy user of Action View. My first contribution to Rails was to change the way that some helpers in Action View were dealing with safe buffers. I knew how safe buffers worked because I had experience working with them with a simple form. So I started to look for places which it was calling methods to create new safe objects where it was not needed. A good example of this is this pull request that it changed the way that HTML safe methods being called in Rails to not call it anymore, given two safe buffers being added together results in a safe buffer. Another way that I found to contribute to Rails at that time was to remove code to support Ruby 1.8. Rails 4.0 was going to drop support for that version of Ruby, so there was no need for checks in the code to make it work with Ruby 1.8 anymore. I saw some PRs being made by Aaron Patterson, aka Tenderlove, and I started to work to try to help him. At the time, there was a way to watch repositories. So to know about new issues and PRs and comments, I had to be pressing refresh in those pages at GitHub. I was doing a little bit of everything in the framework. Fix CI that was broken because some change for other contributors or because dependencies got updated. Reply to issues, people opening, giving feedback and providing help. Review PRs even though I could not merge. I was trying mostly to mimic Jose's behavior. After a week doing that, I built some courage to do a bigger change. Usually inspired by simple form, I refactored the form helpers code, extracted each input type to its own class, with the goal to make it easier for simple form to extend those classes and for Rails to test and maintain this code. Because of this change, I got invited to participate in the Rails contributor chat. This was still mid-January. Now, with access to the Rails contributor chat, I was going to have a steady stream of ideas how to improve Rails, given most of those ideas happen in the chat, or sometimes people are just talking about ideas and come up with solutions quickly. My first big feature was adding collection ready buttons and collection checkbox to form helpers. This again was an extraction for simple form, and I worked with my coworker Carlos, which after some years also became a Rails core member, to add this feature to the framework. This feature was mostly made easier because of my previous refactoring to create classes for form tags. And because of this work, we could easily add this feature. After a few months working in Rails, I got commit access. It was May of 2012. With commit access, my contributions intensified. Not only my own contributions, but I also merged other people's PRs. Most of the core members at the time were either busy with other things or retiring as was the case for Yehuda Katz in college. So we had a huge backlog of PRs to be merged. I started working with Carlos to clear that backlog. We are working to clean this backlog even during weekends. While we were also working many hours to triage issues. If you don't know, triage issues is the activity of validating issues that are open by other contributors and to see if they are valid or not, answering questions, closing them, tagging. And it was during this time that I defined most of the current process to triage issues in the Rails framework that's still used today. Mostly based on my own experience doing this triage and also by observing how Jose was handling them before me. In October of 2012, I joined the Rails core team. And with that, my commitment to the framework only increased. I got many new responsibilities. I became organizer and mentor for the Google Summer of Code project inside the Rails org. I became the first interaction for most first-time Rails contributor, given Jose was already focused most of his time in the Elixir language at this point. I became the release manager of Rails, taking over from Aaron Patterson, and sometimes delegating this role to new members of the team, like Elin and Casper once did, as a rite of passage to new members. I joined the security team and became its leader, taking over for Kos, one of the core members, which retired that year. At this point, I was working closer to 16 hours a day. It was basically two jobs. My full-time job as a consultant at Platform Tech, and a full-time job as maintainer of Rails. All those crazy hours started to affect my job and led to a burnout. I had a really hard time. I even thought about quitting programming. I took some months off and handed most of my responsibilities to other people in the company. My work in the Rails project also changed. I still had motivation to do it, but I could not work outside my day job anymore. Otherwise, I would continue to have the same problems which caused my burnout. So my contribution decreased. With that burnout experience, I started to think about how I would take my open source career more seriously. I knew I would not be able to contribute what I want to contribute back if I kept working as a consultant. In the meantime, I was still curious about that allegation that was made in 2008. Rails does not scale. In the 4 years that I had as a consultant, I was able to work in many applications that had performance problems, but usually the solution were in the application itself, not in the language or the framework. So I still did not understand that allegation. I decided to look for opportunities to explore this area and understand better those kind of problems. I believed that working in an application that was pushing the boundaries of Ruby and Rails would be a perfect way to explore this area. As a member of the Rails core team, I was exposed to pull requests from many people, and some of them were changing the framework to try to solve performance problems, and one application special caught my attention. This application was Shopify. I ended up talking with a Rails contributor that was submitting many performance improvements based on Shopify's needs, and he invited me to visit the office for them to show me what kind of challenges they were trying to solve. During this visit, I ended up falling in love with those challenges and decided to join the team. This change also gave me the possibility to choose working full-time as an open source developer, which I could not do as a consultant working at Platform Tech. Talk a little bit about Shopify. Shopify started in 2004, before even the first Rails release. Our CEO, Toby Luckey, was member of the Rails core team at the time and used Rails, which he received from DHH in a zip file, to write the application. This application is still the same, which many developers work today, and was never rewritten. Shopify is a huge application. It has more than 3 million of lines of Ruby code. The speed with the application evolves is also huge. It changes more than 40 times a day. It gets more than 1,000 commits across all the applications they have, and it has more than 500 developers working on it. My first project was to upgrade the main Shopify application to Rails 4.1. Shopify was never stuck in any version of Rails, but at the time, they were almost 2 versions behind from the latest stable version of the framework, which was working to prepare the 5.0 release. Since the beginning, I had a very audacious goal of running that application, one of the largest Rails applications in the world, in the development branch of the framework. My goal was to decrease the time to new features from years to days without needing to keep a fork of Rails. As secondary goal, I wanted to use that large code base with a large test suite as an exhaustive test suite to the framework. This project took me 4 years to complete. During this time, we are not only improving the framework for our needs, but also for thousands of other applications in the community. We also created a good part of the upgrade process for Rails applications that many consulting companies are selling as services today. The application is backward compatible for features, improving dual boot were some of the techniques that we made popular in the Ruby community. In 2019, looking to increase the scope of influence of my team, I accepted a new mission inside Shopify. The mission was to improve static analysis in our code base, and one of the things that was initially suggested was a type system for Ruby. At the time, I was very skeptical with the idea. In my opinion, one of the advantages of Ruby is the freedom it provides, and I thought types would steal that from us. I also did not understand which problem we are trying to solve with them. It looked to me as a solution in search of a problem. I took the mission to try to answer my own questions, and that meant that I would need to change my role inside Shopify to be a manager. I did not realize at the time, but this also affected my role in the Rails community since I would have way less time to make contributions. In our scale, good parts of developers use the CI pipeline to know if the code is working or not. What would happen if a developer writes the name of the class wrongly? Well, this would probably mean that they would need to wait at least 20 minutes to know what the class was wrong. So we needed something that provides fast feedback loops without loading the applications, without running code, without running code for the entire code base, and even without writing tests. Because of our relationship with Stripe, we had access to Sorbet before it even was made available for general public, and started to experiment with it. Given my skepticism, I decided with the team to take a more scientific approach for this adoption. We started the adoption in our biggest application, trying to verify many hypotheses we defined. Today, Sorbet is used in more than 300 applications inside Shopify. The adoption of Sorbet in the main applications is with 91% of the files being checked by Sorbet, 49% of the methods being checked as well, and 58% of the methods with signatures. Every 6 months, we ask people their opinions about the tool. And in those questions, we saw that the opinions of people that think Sorbet is useful have grown over the time. Sorbet also helped people to identify errors earlier, sometimes errors that even the test could not find. And not only errors were being avoided, but the understanding of the code base were being made easier. Today, I consider the adoption of Sorbet at Shopify a success and can't wait to see the community adopting it more. At this point in my career, I perceived that just myself working as I was would not be sustainable. Not only it would be impossible to me to sustain the level of engagement I had in the Rails project for much longer, but there were a lot of things that I did not have the skill yet to work on, like for example working in the Ruby language. As a manager, my goal was to find more people that could help me to maintain Rails inside and outside Shopify, and also build a team to contribute to Ruby. With my help, Shopify started to invest heavily in the language. I had the opportunity to build a team of 35 passionate developers working with me full-time to improve Ruby, Rails, and the ecosystem. Some of the things we are currently doing, like working with Oracle to deploy the first Real application in production and using of this knowledge to improve C Ruby as well. We are working on a new just-time compiler for C Ruby with Rails application as main target. This new JIT, called YJIT, is already approved to be included in Rails 3.1. We are also working to change the way Ruby allocates objects, from objects with fixed width to objects with variable width, improving the way CPU uses caches. And now that I have a team of people supporting my work and even expanded what I could do alone, I beg to focus full-time to Ruby or to Rails. I see my role in Rails more like an architect and a team leader than as a hacker. I'm responsible for keeping the framework working, the individual pieces talk with each other in the right way, and being the interface with new contributors. I was never the kind of person that was work in the big and shiny new features, but there is not a single feature of the framework which I'm not involved with. My main focus now is bringing new contributors to the framework the same way I brought new members to my team at Shopify. I believe in my trajectory and the steps I took can inspire new contributors, and if I could extract some advice from them, they would be: start with the things you are familiar with. Rails is a big project, sometimes very scary to start, but there is always some features of the framework we are more familiar with. In my case, it was actual Form helpers. For you, it could be Active Record, Active Storage, or even the new Access setup. Get familiar with the project. You don't need to know everything to start contributing to the project, but with time, it would be important to get understanding of the big picture. Follow the discussions in the issue tracker. Ask questions in the Ruby core forum. Read the commits. Follow others. Like Jose inspired me, you could be inspired by others. Try to follow their work. Reach out to them asking for directions. And give contributors attention. The most important thing a project maintainer can give to a contributor is attention. Review people's PRs, reply people's questions, try to reproduce and fix the issues. Expand your horizons. Try to understand similar projects, even the ones you don't think you would need. In my case, it was Sorbet. for you, maybe a new framework in a different language could bring some ideas of how to improve Rails. Create copies of you. As you get more comfortable with projects and contribute more, try to support who is starting. Each help can go many miles for people that already have the desire to help but don't know how to do it. I hope to see you on GitHub. Thank you.